Hi everyone, big welcome. So good to see all of you online. Firstly, before we start with the session, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land which we meet today. As for myself, I'm dialing in from the land of Wurundjeri Woi people of the Kulin Nation in Melbourne. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Thank you again for coming along to tonight's Ask Me Anything session. This session is designed to spotlight the journey of a technologist turned CTO and to answer the question, why take the leap to entrepreneurship? I'm Rani, I'm the community manager and scouting at Antler, Australia. Also in this call are Joel and Nina from the scouting team here at Antler. Tonight, we'll have two legends with us. Joel, scouting manager at Antler Australia, who is also an exited founder himself, sitting down with one of our portfolio company founder, a technologist turned CTO, who has successfully taken the plunge, built, launched, and scaled his company with Antler, Tim of Factory AI. Also to let everyone know, this AMA is a third edition of a 4 edition series, and we'll have one final one coming up in January to shed more light on the value of building with a co-founder. So count yourself in that one as well. Yeah, you're in for a treat tonight. We'll start the session with a bit of introduction of Antler, followed by a candid conversation with Tim and Joel, diving into his founder journey and experience building a company with us. At any point of the conversation, feel free to contribute, addressing your questions, comments in the chat. It's really for you to ask your burning questions. And we'll also have lots and plenty of time for Q&A throughout the session. Before we kick off, just some housekeeping. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking, just to avoid any background noise. And if possible, we'd love to see who we're speaking to, so please keep your camera turned on. Alrighty, so let's get into it. Inviting Joel to introduce about Antler and to kick off today's conversation. Joel, all yours.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Rani. Well, thank you everybody for joining. I want to first quickly give you guys a little brief overview of what we do at Antler. Probably most people are on the call here already have some idea, so I will try to keep that brief. But in case there's anybody on the call who's really interested in potentially joining next year and doesn't have a good idea of what we do, I will do that. And then we're going to jump straight into our conversation with Tim. So firstly, Antler is one of the most active early stage investors globally. I think we actually are, like, not one of the most, we are. In Australia alone, we've got over 100 portfolio companies. This year, we made 27 investments into new Australian companies. There's 1 billion funds under management. We've got 250 employees around the globe. And in Australia, we have locations in Sydney and in Melbourne. So if anybody's thinking of joining, we would love to see you in the offices either in Sydney or Melbourne next year. Our current fund is looking to be closed around 73 million, but it is actually still open. But it will be around that. So what's our approach? If you're familiar with most VCs, they generally want you to have a product or certainly an idea before you actually even go and speak to them. What's really interesting about Antler is that you don't actually need to have any of this before you apply or even join. So what we do is we recruit diverse and exceptional founders to build their companies with Antler. So there's three archetypes of people that we look for. So tech and product builders, that's what we've got Tim here for today. We definitely want to dig into the technical side of building a company with Antler, but we also look for commercial founders, business people, operators. This is generally people with backgrounds of exited founders, CEOs, MBAs, people with really strong go-to-market and sales skills. And then we also look for domain experts. So the domain experts are often going to be the people coming to Antler with a really strong idea of what they want to build, or potentially even just a problem space that they've identified in their industry. And these people are usually looking to commercialize research that they've done either at university, or potentially they've worked in an industry for quite a while, and they really understand that industry and understand that problem. And this is also, you know, Tim, not everybody falls into a category neatly, right? So, you know, Tim's, whilst he's the tech guy at Factory AI, he's also a bit of a domain expert. So we'll dig into that as well. So one cool thing to point out is that we're industry agnostic, and we invest in a really diverse range of companies. So B2B and enterprise. We also do consumer stuff, fintech, green tech, prop tech, all techs. If it really has the potential to be, I don't know who iPhone is, but yes, he's pretty funny. That must be JP. So yeah, we basically, the short story here is that we can invest in any industry. So regardless of where your specialty is, you know, you're welcome. All right, cool. So since 2019, Antler Australia has backed 300 founders. So this is kind of, want to just point out some of the more successful ones. So in the climate tech space, we've got Path Zero. They're providing a solution to collect and communicate carbon data. Their most recent valuation was up around 70 to 80 million, and similar for Upcover and Zalient. So there has been quite a few real success stories, even though Antler's only been going in Australia for about 4 years. Awesome. All right, cool. So I want to introduce Tim. As I mentioned, Tim is the CTO of Factory AI. So what I want to do is hand over to Tim. I've got a couple of questions here that I might kick us off with, but if anybody's got any questions, you're welcome to add them in the chat as we go along. And if you want to ask a question, please feel free to come on the mic, just raise your hand, and I will say who should come up and speak. So firstly, Tim, I want to just understand a little bit about your background. Can you tell us how you got here and a little bit of your professional history?
Yeah, thanks, Joel. Hi, everyone. My name's Tim, and it's a pleasure to be here. How I got here, well, there's the long story and the short one. Let's start with the short one first, and then we'll see where we go from here. So I might have like a sort of classic background as a techie. I studied computer engineering at university, and then I went out and worked at a couple of large tech companies such as IBM. Decided to move my life over to the UK, where I spent a decade working at a telco and AWS, before coming back at the beginning of this year to start on this journey, building my own company with Jean-Philippe, JP, which is now called Factory AI. So that's the short version there. As Joel mentioned, I want to make this as interactive as possible. So really keen to hear what kind of questions you have. I'm also keen to hear if anyone's already started their own company in the audience, and if you already have, then what are sort of the ideas that got you motivated in building a company, and why that particular company in particular as well.
Awesome. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about Factory AI, but what I'd also love to know is, where does F7I come from and what does that mean? For anyone who wants to know a little bit more, I'm just popping that into the chat. That is the URL for Tim's business. So yeah, tell us a bit about the business and how you guys got this URL.
Sure. Maybe we'll make it a little bit of a competition if someone can guess what S7I, how we came up with that, and then I'll answer the first bit, and then we can come back to the second part there. So
Fantastic.
the idea of Factory AI came about as I was working with a lot of manufacturing customers in the UK. This is whilst I was at AWS as a solutions architect. And we came across this problem quite a lot. And this is essentially the problem where manufacturers, their machines, they need to be running 24 hours. And when they don't, this is essentially called unplanned downtime. So using machine learning, we help companies understand when their machines are going to fail. So there's anomaly detection. We also leverage the operational data that they have. So think about your car and the service log that it has. There's a bit of a history there. So you know the service intervals and potentially when there has been previous failures as well. So we leverage this information to then predict how much remaining useful life a machine actually has. So potentially actions for the maintenance engineers and the reliability engineers is whether we need to fix it now or whether it can be done in the next PM cycle, PM meaning preventative maintenance. The other thing that we use this data for is to help them optimize their plan. So the key people that we really solve this for, if you think about large manufacturing companies, their operations span multiple football, multiple cricket fields, right? It takes about 30 minutes to walk from one end to the other, and it's filled with thousands of machines. You maybe have a team of 20 to 50 people to look after all of these. And so how do you prioritize which machines actually need maintenance at a certain point in time, whilst also maximizing the actual maintenance performance, meaning X number of production products produced with the lowest maintenance cost possible. And this is what we are trying to build at Factory AI. To come back to the second question, I believe Juan answered it correctly. Yeah, so that's it, Factory AI. So there's 7 characters between the F and the I, which is why it's S7I. We took this a little bit from, maybe you've seen accessibility or internationalization, although not as long, but similar principle there. So that's where we came up with the domain. We bought this domain before we actually got any funding. Otherwise, we would have purchased factory.ai. Yeah, a little late for that now.
Okay, well, well done, Juan. You get a star, and I learned something new as well. So that's fantastic. All right, cool. So we've got a couple of questions coming through. Some of them are about Antler, but let's keep rolling on with Factory AI and Tim, and I will get to some of the Antler questions a little bit later. So I guess what actually motivated you to go and start your own company? Like, obviously, you're coming from this tech background, presumably you're on, a good wicket there. What was the thing that made you say, like, I need to go and do this for myself? And then how did you find Antler in that process?
Yeah. So I think I've always wanted to build my own company, and I guess I'm sort of the person, why I never took this jump over here is I'm the sort of person that is quite calculated, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately. And I went, you start off with your career and you kind of think, well, you need to build experience in order to build a business, right? But unfortunately, a lot of companies, they're incentivized, like, the big tech companies, they're incentivized to keep you there, right? And then you kind of go into a domain. But if you want to build a business, really the only way to do that, to get all of that experience of how to build and operate a business, like no one's going to go and teach you finance. You have to kind of do that on your own through, experience. And AWS is not going to do that if you're a solution architect role. Neither will they teach you how to do go-to-market, build financial models, all of these other things which are kind of important when you're starting up to build a business to see if it's actually viable, or even understanding what is the problem, what is the market size, all of these things, right? So this is why it's kind of important to, I guess, take that leap in if you're kind of interested in doing that. Not to make it sound kind of daunting and not to throw anyone off that though. but I guess the real reason and why I wanted that. So I spent a decade in AWS. Spent a decade in the UK, and I was planning to move back to Sydney. Right. Fortunately, I was kind of moving in a direction where I was starting to work with more startups. Right. So my last role at AWS was working with private equity firms, and a lot of them had invested in essentially have growth equity firms. So these are later stage startups. So think Series D and E type startups, quite big. They're already scaling, right? I was fortunate enough at one of these events to meet a founder who went through the Antler program in Copenhagen. So one of the stars that you saw at the beginning, where Antler operates in 26 countries in Denmark, was fortunate enough to meet a founder there. They introduced me to Antler. And I decided to take a good look into what it was at the airport, waiting for my flight back to London. Applied for it, knowing that I'd be back in the country in a few months' time, just to see what would happen, right? But really, going back to the point of, I didn't want to come back to Sydney and do the same thing, right? Same role, for another 6 months, 12 months, whatever, right? That didn't really seem like I was challenging myself. So I kind of have a personal philosophy where I want to be uncomfortable being, I want to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? If I feel too comfortable in my role, then I don't feel like I'm growing. And I think as part of this growth mindset is really what helped me take that lead.
Awesome, man. Thank you. That's a really good answer. So I want to go back to David's question. He said that is there a fair bit of crossover between tech and product builders and domain experts? I'll give my version, and then I'm curious to hear, Tim, if you feel that way, especially now that you're actually working with these people in factories. So I would say that generally there's a little bit of crossover between all three of the groups that I talked about before. It's just dependent on, where you really stand out. But the way that we would define a domain expert, there's generally not a lot of crossover. When we say a tech and product person, it usually means the person who is day to day building whatever needs to happen for that company. Usually these are software engineers, but they also could just be technologists who really understand the product that they're building. And the domain experts usually have a lot more industry insights, understanding of the problem, connections in the industry so that they can go out and build relationships. And they will be able to kind of turbocharge the growth of that industry, of that company, because they just know it inside out. So Tim, I guess the question for you is did you feel like you had any domain expertise in this industry when you were getting into it, and has that changed over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think getting into it, I didn't know anywhere near as much as I do now. You need to live and breathe it, right? You need to sit in the factories and work alongside we have something that we use called an ICP, essentially an ideal customer profile. This is who you're building for, essentially. And this ICP for us are those maintenance and reliability engineers. And so until you really live and breathe the problem with them, then that's when you become more of a domain expert. That's when you can start to empathize and appreciate more of the problem there. I think I kind of had solved the problem for a previous company or a number of previous companies using technology at AWS, but we had really sold to a different persona there, such as CIOs, CTOs, right? But not really the people that we end up building a product from the ground up from, right? So it's important to know who your users are and then who the company is as well. I think one thing to probably keep in mind, like a model, I like models. So if you think about, you've got product market fit, right? The other thing maybe to think about is what is the problem founder market fit, right? So maybe you think about what are you good at? So unless you're a developer building for developers, then maybe you are that tech and product and domain expert, right? But in many cases, you might not be. So if you think about really specialized industries, like a lot of the companies that you saw on the previous screenshot, so let's take InsurTech, right? I haven't spent 15 years in insurance, so I'd no way, I'd not be no way a kind of domain expert in that area. Right? So that's one way to think about it like that.
Okay, awesome. So I want to move to Alan's question. And again, the purpose for tonight, really, we want to dive deep into the tech side of things. So we do welcome these types of questions. So Alan's asked, what type of inputs and features do you use for your models?
Yeah, so inputs and features. So the way that we work is we have a number of sensors that are installed on machines, or we also use data that is already coming from these machines. So the sensors can record, vibration, temperature, pressure, and a bunch of other metrics as well. So these are all kind of the kind of inputs. And we also leverage other information such as the service information, and whenever there's failures corresponding to in time as well to the actual issues as well. So let's say we have temperature and vibration data, and then when there's also an issue there, we use this to label our data sets as well in order to train those anomaly detection models, essentially. In terms of features, we keep it kind of light. We use a lot of, and this is one thing to actually think about as a builder, right? So I'm not a machine learning expert. I'm not a data scientist, so I'll admit that, right? But you can actually do a lot out of the box using abstracted tools. And I'm not talking about, things like, models that have been already pre-built, and you essentially bring your own data set in order to leverage what's already potentially being a foundational model, and then you can kind of tune it using your own data there. So that's one way to get started really quickly. The trade-off there is really accuracy. And I think at this point in time, we're not really prioritizing accuracy for our models. We're really prioritizing that we can test this concept and prove it with our customers, right? So we buy speed and security over anything else that we've got.
Really? Okay, that's very interesting. And how has that reception been with your trial customers taking that route of, that focus?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's been quite positive. I think this is where you could be quite lucky to land a customer which is really, so they know that you're a startup, and they know that you're not going to probably get things right from day one, and you can make some mistakes as long as you're open and honest about it, and you learn from this, right? So we've called out a number of false positives, and we've also missed a couple true negatives in that. So if you think about the accuracy of the models, then yeah, it's not 100% accurate. And I don't think you can expect, any machine learning or AI model to be 100% accurate anyway, but, there's always a tolerance, right? And so we probably work to around 95% accuracy at this point in time, but we could do much better, not with the resources we currently have, but that's why we're kind of trying to prove the concept.
Okay, awesome. So VJ's asked, how do you differentiate in a crowded space, industrial Internet of Things? And he's asking this because he has an idea in fintech, and I don't know if there's a wide market for the use case and if it's a good business idea. I think firstly, let's just lay out, was this a crowded space when you were starting off? I know obviously industrial IoT is probably a big space, but were there other people doing what you're doing? And yeah, how are you differentiating?
Yeah, absolutely. So outside of Australia, there are many different players. Inside Australia, there's probably a couple. One that's really well known. It's been in the business for 10 to 15 years. However, they're really focused, or their initial focus, and I think this is changing over time as well, and we'll see this change over time as well, is they built their own hardware, right? And that's essentially what we focus on the software, we focus on the machine learning aspect and the intelligence, and we trust that these companies already have some data, and we help them improve on the data quality so that we can train better models using the data they already have. If you think about the machines that they have, a lot of the machines are being replaced over decades, and these new machines will have these sensors built into them. So really going down a path and building our own hardware probably doesn't make too much sense. The other thing that we see happening a lot is, the democratization of kind of IoT and cloud and machine learning, making it much easier for us to just move quickly in the software space and really test it out. So maybe VJ, to your point, is can you think about building a prototype really quickly and maybe in like a few days, and then showing it to as many prospects as you can to really validate the business idea?
Yeah, amazing. And I think we can actually tie that into David's question, which is, does Antler have a focus on potential unicorns? I mean, yes, certainly we do. Like, our goal is to invest in fast-growing, globally scalable companies. And, as Tim mentioned, like, if they had have gone down the same route as their competitors and they're trying to build hardware to solve this problem, it's significantly harder to build and scale a hardware business compared to a software business. So it's definitely not to say that we don't invest in hardware businesses, but it's more appetizing when you can say, hey, we can expand really quickly because, that's our business model, basically. All right, cool. So James has asked, do you guys have a North Star? Like, what are the metrics that you're focused on? How are you monitoring these things? And how's Antler helping you to achieve those?
Yeah, James, that's a great question. I think at this point in time, maybe a good thing to think about is we don't have product market fit. And because we don't have product market fit, we're constantly experimenting. So as such, we don't have like a true North Star that you would see in a lot of other product companies which already have product market fit. More or less, our North Star is to onboard as many customers as possible, right? And really validate the problem that we have. So if we can sell to 10, 15 and find product market fit, and just keep in mind, we are working in the enterprise space. If you think about these really large manufacturers, right? So we have like a 9 to 12 month sales cycle. And we've been fortunate enough to do quite well with the resources we've had this year. But we don't have a specific North Star metric yet, but we do monitor metrics such as, what does our sales pipeline look like? How many active users do we have using our product? How many times do they use the different features that we're building out? Stuff like that, right? In terms of how Antler has helped us achieve those, it's certainly more in the information space. So as you kind of go through the program, there's different enablement type things. So there's the startup metrics, right? So the things that Antler will be concerned about. So there's essentially a ladder of proof or a ladder of what these metrics look like. And without diving into too much detail as to that, you could probably imagine it's like, well, what is your revenue? What is your ARR? What is your MRR? What is your daily active users? How quickly are what's your growth rate and all of these other things as well. So these are different things that, we think about as well, but we don't necessarily benchmark ourselves on this, especially at this early stage.
Awesome. And so with a lot of those pilot customers, the manufacturers, how did you build that bridge? How did you get those guys on board? As you mentioned before, like, you're coming to these guys as a startup, they have these big, multi-$100 million factories. How do you say, hey, can we come in and tinker a little bit and get access?
Yeah, that's really good. So I think Johnny G asked a similar question, right?
Yeah, that's
and so. Yeah, so we can't compare ourselves to enterprise. So we're open and honest with our customers, right? So early prospects, we say, hey, we're doing some research. Would you like to help us? And so we're trying to understand from the customers there. And if they're really interested and maybe even want to help us, then we go, well, how would you like to do a pilot with us, right? So you take it to the next level. And really, when we're trying to win pilots now, we're trying to de-risk the essentially the opportunity for the company to work with us. And that can be a number of different things. It could be financial. It could be like access to different things, right? So we build all of our hardware. So we provision all of our hardware and the networking and everything else. So that's external to their operating, right? We don't go through all of the potential IT network and have to go through 6-month approval process for all of that. But the data that we collect is non-sensitive, non-PII, right? So there's no issues with that. It's essentially either a temperature reading and a vibration reading and a pressure flow reading at this point in time, right? So not only the data itself it's not like they already had that and it's super precious and they're using it for all of their models already. So the companies that we target aren't necessarily there, right? In terms of building that trust, right, this takes time. I think being first open and honest with your customers is the only way that you can earn their trust to get to these pilots. They be open and honest with where you're at in terms of what you want to hope to achieve with the pilot with them as well. So we set out at the start of every single pilot, here is a one pager of the key metrics we want to target for the next 4 weeks. And then we have regular check-ins with the key stakeholders. We try to keep it relatively small. So you think about these enterprises, right? Like the more people you bring in, then it becomes more of a kind of decision fatigue. You've probably been in a meeting where you've had more than 7 people and nothing gets done, right? So we want to keep it down to like 3 people. So like who's your champion? Who's the data lead, if they have one? And then who's your user expert or your product lead on this, right? And that way we can move quickly and we can get a pilot off the ground fairly successfully with these manufacturers. The other thing as well is you have to look at whether manufacturers could be inclined to working with startups, right? Not everyone wants to be the first person to take that lead, but you'll get a sense in terms of who these people might be, and these are the ones you really want to overservice, right? Make sure that you really win these kind of customers over. Yeah, I'll leave it at that to see if you've got any follow-up questions.
One quick question about that as well. Like, who do you guys need to target for the cold outreach? Are you going to the top? Are you speaking to the CEOs and the general managers of these factories, or is there someone down the line that actually is better to target?
Yeah. So for us, it's a bit of we take a hybrid approach. We're still experimenting with this because we don't know what's the most effective approach. And I think this is what we're doing right now is what we've seen to have given us the most traction, right? We typically aim at the engineering managers and the site leaders. So they're probably the top person within an actual factory, and the person right under that that's responsible for making sure all the machines are running and operating, right? It's not the CIOs or the CEOs of these companies, unless it's a smaller company, right? So we're targeting enterprises, so there's thousands of employees here. I think if we started to go down the kind of mid-market route, then we probably target more of these people, but at this point in time, we
Gotcha. All right, cool. So I think Johnny's second question, we kind of already touched on, like what differentiates you guys. You're really focusing on the software aspect as opposed to the hardware aspect. So let's move on to Mo's question. And I love this one because I don't really know what it's asking, but I'm sure you do, Tim. So do you have enough failure data points so that you can validate anomaly detection predictions?
Yeah. So the honest answer to that, Mo, is we're still learning, right? And the way that we operate is when we start instrumenting these machines or assets with sensors, we go into a listen mode only. But then we also say that, look, we know that we haven't done a full cycle, meaning that like we haven't seen what 365 days looks for this machine, right? So there's no way that we can see that, right? That's option A, right? But if the company that we're working with already has all of this information, if they do, then we can leverage that information, right? And then that way our anomaly detection models are actually more precise, more accurate.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So I'll just quickly touch on Mo's question. You can join Antler if you're in Perth or any of the major cities or really anywhere in Australia. You would still need to come to Sydney or Melbourne for the first couple of weeks of the residency because we want to get to know you, we want to meet you, and especially for the finding a co-founder aspect, it's really important. But once that's over, you're welcome to, if your company allows, work remotely or do the second half of the residency remotely. Okay, cool. So Satish has asked, at what stage did you realize that you have to find a co-founder, and what was your journey like inside Antler? So yeah, let's dig into the co-founder stuff. How did you meet JP? Did you have to date anyone else beforehand? Was it love at first sight? Tell us.
Yeah. So maybe to answer Satish's question directly, I never really thought about the option of going solo because of what it takes to actually build a company and build it quickly, right? So I think you can definitely build businesses by yourself, and it might take a bit more time, and you might be able to get there, right? But I think what VCs and maybe Antler are more interested in is co-founders help de-risk the journey, but also help you. Two people can do much more than this, right? So if you're developing a product and you also need to do go-to-market and sales and direct outreach, well, how are you going to get everything done and do it quickly as well? And then the point about like, well, how did I make JP my co-founder? So going into the program, right? We have an opportunity to do all of the introductions via Slack, right? And looking at JP's profile, nothing really stood out to me at that point in time when I read it, right? And this is probably because our interests didn't align. But the big difference, and maybe to encourage people who are outside of the cities to actually really take part in, one of the cohorts in Melbourne and Sydney, is when I met JP in person, it was completely different. And whilst we didn't commit to each other on the first day, the first week, or whatever, right? And much like what Joel's just mentioned, it is a bit about data, right? So there were a number of people that I was also interested in working with. And it's really about like assessing, for me, it was their level of commitment, their values, where they wanted to get to in a certain point in time. So it was their longevity in this, because you're going to be in this for a long time. So we're expecting to work on this company, this idea for the next 5 to 10 years, probably more towards the 10-year mark, right, to be honest. And so can you work with this person for the next 10 years? And if I think about it, I've been with my wife for 17 years, so it's probably a large part of that. And you think about like how long you've been with somebody before, and you have to think about, well, can you be together for this long, right? But maybe rather than think about it that way, with JP, like we just said, look, happy to work with each other. We're not really tied to each other's ideas. Let's see which one has the most merit and go with that and just experiment. And somehow we made it through the first track out round. We went through due diligence. We went through investment committee, IC, and got funding. And we kind of just been going on ever since, right? But I think had it changed, had we not gone through track out, had we not been successful in getting to the next stage, things might have been different. But it's more about an experiment, right? As long as you're happy to take that first step and then see where things go, right? I think that's the most that you can expect of somebody. And really, you can't make that decision from just a single conversation or even like a number of conversations over a 3 to 4 week period, right? It's really about what is it like to work with this person day in, day out for the next X years, right? And you don't know the answer to that, but I think you can do things to kind of do that. And maybe that's being really open and upfront about like what each person wants. Like I said, those values are really important. And just being transparent, right? Like we try to communicate as much as possible with each other, know where each other is at. Sometimes I'll be feeling pretty bad, maybe because I haven't shipped any code for a few days and I've been working on a particular problem for a long time. But if you have a co-founder who's supporting you, I think that's great, right? And likewise, we don't often get like, there's a lot of companies out there, right? But, we might not hit all of our metrics in terms of all the customers we want to talk to and get in touch with. But that's fine, right? So as long as we're there to support each other.
One thing I wanted to touch on that you just mentioned is you guys really focused on, do you have the same long-term vision? Can you work together? Do you have the same working style? Like, is there any differences? One thing that Antler strongly suggests you do, I won't say make you do, but is a very strong suggestion, is what we call the 50 questions. And that's an exercise where we say to you guys like, hey, these are really important topics that we think that you should cover. Like, how long do you expect to work on this business for? How many hours a week do you expect that you're going to work on it for? What does a good outcome look like for you? What does a bad outcome look like for you? So did you guys go through that exercise?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I may have forced a few people to go through this. A few too many people, actually. I don't know what it is, but I kind of like using as much data to make my decisions, and probably that's true in the actual company that we're building as well, right? But I think it's less about like, I guess some of the 50 co-founder questions are really important, but also the discussion that went around it as well. Understanding the mindset of JP as he went through that exercise as well, and the amount of effort he took was also one of the things that helped me make that decision. Like, this is a co-founder that writes really well, communicates really well, that has a strong emotional intelligence, right? Like being able to deal with difficult situations, right? He's not hiding behind or hiding away or shying away from any of these things in the past, right? They're all learnings that we have. And I think it's being open and upfront about all of these different things, which really gave me a good impression of JP. So I definitely think the 50 co-founder questions are helpful. Maybe looking back upon it now, like it's most useful in the first maybe like month and a half, 2 months, maybe even. But after that, like you work enough with somebody, you start to learn the ins and outs with somebody.
Nice. I will add a little bit of color from what I saw from the co-founding team during the residency. I really saw the commitment that you guys had, not to just to the business, but also to each other. So I think that almost every time I was in the office, Tim and JP were there before me, and they were there before all the other people in the residency, sitting there together every morning, working. And so I think, that type of commitment to each other from the start really sets you up on the right foot. Because, if one person is kind of half in it and the other person's fully in it, it's never going to work, right? So you really need to be either all in or all out. And I think it was pretty clear to me that from chatting to you guys, you were having lunch together every day, doing meetings together all the time. Like whenever I, was having a conversation with Tim, it's like JP would pop up. And then whenever I was having a conversation with JP, Tim would pop up, right? And you guys were just really a very close-knit team during the residencies. And I think those types of things make a big difference. All right, cool. So David's asked, there's a load of HVAC and other energy system kits that have sensors. Do you consider any of these in your product?
Yeah, David, I think it's a great question. Answer is we'd love to try and bring on board as many assets onto our platform as possible. So we think that's one of the key things, maybe actually going back to, I think it was James's question around what are these metrics, right? So number of users, but also number of assets we have on our product or on our platform. But one thing to keep in mind is like a lot of these HVAC systems, there's probably components that fail more than others. So rather than just focusing on the entire system itself, we might want to focus on a subsystem that will fail more particularly. So like if we're actually looking at a mean time between failure of 10 years, then I don't think our product is going to deliver much value at all, right? But if we can actually find a part of that system which has a failure rate maybe within 6 to 12 months, then we can actually demonstrate value of our platform if we can actually predict when that's actually going to fail for those things. Yeah. So I think the short answer is yes, but it really depends on those are the other things that what I mentioned around mean time between failure as being an important consideration of what kind of equipment we look at.
Cool. Gotcha. And so let's go to Mo's question. How well formed was the idea of Factory AI when you came to Antler? Did you write it on your application that you were already thinking about that? Did it change over time? Did you have the use case, and have you done all of the feasibility studies, etc.?
Yeah. So funny answer is maybe I thought I'd done a lot, but I'd done nowhere near as much as I really needed to, right? And so the things that I did well maybe is potentially communicating the message to various different potential co-founders. And the way that I did that was writing a bit of a doc, and maybe if people are in the audience are from Amazon, they'll be familiar with the 6-pager. But really starting out with a 1-pager. And what that looked like was a series of, here's a kind of press release with a bunch of questions are tied to it. And so these questions really said, well, who's the customer? What is the problem? Kind of more along the lines of, well, how painful is this problem? And, how do they experience it? Can you give more detail in terms of what this problem looks like? And then what is a potential solution? And like the why now and like the why you are the important things as part of this, right? So the solution isn't really much of like, you don't really have to have a solid answer there, right? But to have a way of like kind of trying to solve it, right, in your mind, right? And this will probably change, right? Ours certainly did. And that's when you kind of extend it and build it out into more of like this 1 to 6 pages, right? But writing is a really good way, a really good mechanism of demonstrating that you can clearly and really concise way communicate your ideas to other people, right? And so one of like when you come into Antler, you're going to hear 50 different ideas, and it's really hard to assess without being able to sit in your own mind space whether an idea actually has merit or not, right? And I don't think you're really there to kind of like take on like there's only a limited amount of time, so you need to use that time really wisely. And so I think you need to focus on a few good ideas, but what are good ideas, right? So you need to make up your mind in terms of what a good idea is there as well. The things that I missed on mine are definitely more in terms of like, well, how is this business going to work? Who is our ideal customer? And diving really deep into that problem there. So sitting alongside these maintenance and reliability engineers. So I certainly underappreciated it from that aspect, but I've learned a lot since then. But I think the messaging for the co-founders was there so that they could understand what the concept really quickly.
And were there any things that changed significantly or that you learned either from Antler or maybe even from some of the other companies that were in the residency that was just like a light bulb going off and you're like, oh, yes, of course, that makes so much sense for this business. Why hadn't I, thought about that before?
Yeah, absolutely. And the standout one was meeting Ian from Avertro. So Avertro are a cybersecurity company. They went through the Antler program. I think it was the first cohort in 2019. Ian was great. We somehow happened to meet him at an external event. And one of the things I missed was actually, how do you get this off the ground? And so in my previous career, I worked at companies which already had product market fit or much later stage, right? But really going from 0 to 1, that first step, is probably one of the hardest ones and something that I didn't pay enough attention to, right? I thought that we could go in, hey, here's a pilot, we'll do it for free, whatever, right? But actually, the way that we position it now is, well, what we learned from Ian was they built out a Virtuo with 5 design partners, right? And so they were building with all of these companies, learning, taking on board all of their feedback whilst building their product at the same time. So that works well in maybe like an enterprise and B2B space. I think you can think about other ways that you can do this something similar. And maybe I think VJ made a point around B2C, right? I think another really good example there maybe is, what's the company with Sky, Joel, the insurtech company? Yeah, Upcover. Are you familiar with like the way that they kind of got their first talk to their first 1,000 prospects or something along those lines? I think this is a story from Dade.
No, actually, I haven't heard that one.
Okay, so I mean, this is secondhand information, so take what you want from it essentially. But their product is essentially insurance for I guess freelancers or people who are in the gig economy. What they did is, every night they went out to where all the Uber drivers are. And where were they? They were sitting in the parking lots waiting to pick up people from Sydney Airport or other areas, right? And they went up and just spoke to them. It's like, hey, is this a problem for you? If we did this, would you be interested? And so in a B2C, maybe you're not building that prototype so you can show the initial customers, but it's building a wait list and then bringing on some of them, kind of the bigger supporters there and getting them to try out your product, right? After you have a few more things there. So there's different ways of thinking about it. So there's, I've given 2 examples, one on like either end of the spectrum, enterprise B2B and kind of B2C. So there's many more in between, right? But you have to get quite creative with what those are.
Yeah, and that's one thing we're going to focus a lot on, especially in the early stages of the residency, is like, yes, okay, this is a problem. Go out and validate it, right? Go out and speak to people, understand if this is a problem that exists inside your head, or if this is a problem that people are willing to pay for. Awesome. So if anyone has any other last questions, this is last call. But if not, I think Tom's question is a really fantastic way to end the session. So Tom asks, what was your most valuable takeaway from the Antler experience?
Yeah. Wow. Most valuable takeaway. There's probably a few. I think for me, going into it, realistically, I wanted to find a co-founder. Wanted to find someone that I could build a business or build a startup with for the next 5 to 10 years, right? That was definitely like for me. That's I guess if you think about like in terms of computer game, that's like achievement unlocked or something else like along those lines, right? So for me, it's definitely the co-founder, but there's so much more to Antler. The obvious one is the funding to actually allow us to spend some time now building this out and really validating this can be an actual startup. But outside of that is the support you get from the Antler alumni network, right? So even the cohort that we went through, we recently had like a bit of a Christmas lunch and we all got together and we sat down just to kind of discuss the highs and lows of everyone's experience. And, you know, the things that we're talking about now are kind of like, well, how do we raise money so that we don't die? Because you start off as default dead, right? And all of our goal is to get to default alive. And, you know, that takes, you know, that I think that actually takes a lot of people to get involved there.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think that probably the most underrated part of the Antler residency is the network that you build inside the residency, right? Because you're all joining at the same time, you've all got the same goal, you're all kind of like going through this journey and you're not competing with them, right? Like they are kind of like your classmates and, you know, those that are getting investment at the same time, it's like you're graduating together, right? And then you want to go on and see, and you're cheering your, you know, friends on from the sidelines because you want them to succeed just as much as, you know, you want yourself to succeed. So I think that's a fantastic place to leave it. I've just dropped a bunch of links in there for anyone who's interested to connect with myself, Rani, Nina, and Tim on LinkedIn. We will be, as we mentioned at the start, doing a couple more installments of this AMA series with different founders from Antler. So please feel free to come along. The next one is on a Wednesday in 2 weeks. But yeah, thank you everybody for coming. It's been an awesome chat. Thank you so much, Tim. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you on Monday.
Thank you all. Thanks,
All right,
Joel.
bye.
See you.